The world is bracing for the start of a new era in Syria. The ouster of President Bashar al-Assad could create one of the most consequential power vacuums in the Middle East. A lightning offensive by Syrian rebels led to the fall of his 24-year rule. With the deposed leader reportedly fleeing to Russia, the Kremlin has confirmed that President Vladimir Putin has granted him and his family asylum. Syrians celebrated the end of the al-Assad regime, but the country's political future remains uncertain. The UN rights chief says any transition must include, quote, accountability for Assad and others behind crimes committed under his rule. The UN Security Council will be convening later today for an emergency meeting. Concerns also mounting over instability in the region. Neighboring countries, including Turkey, Iraq and Lebanon, facing heightened security risks as they anticipate an escalation in cross-border violence and sectarian tension. Israeli officials already promising a step up in airstrikes on Syria's heavy strategic weaponry, while keeping a, quote, limited troop presence on the ground. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier ordered his military to seize a demilitarized buffer zone off the border, which separates the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights from Syria. And for more, our correspondents Trent Murray and Dasha Chernyshova standing by on the Israel-Syria border and also in Moscow. Let's start with Trent. Now, you're at the Israel-Syria border. Earlier, this is Sunday, in fact, the Israeli Prime Minister claiming some credit for what has happened in Syria, saying Israeli attacks on Hezbollah have weakened the former president's support from Hezbollah as well as Iran. So what's happening, though, on the ground in terms of attacks from the Israeli side?
Yeah, well, look, certainly coming up here, you are seeing an increased military presence as additional troops from across Israel are arriving to this border under the direction of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to move in to that demilitarized zone. That is Syria behind me there. And we know that those Israeli forces are making their way deeper there. They are now around 10 kilometres into Syrian territory. Officially, the IDF saying that they are there to try and secure that zone to make sure that what is happening in Syria doesn't pose a threat to the state of Israel. But already analysts in this region are questioning whether, given the calamity and the uncertainty of what's happening in Syria, this is an opportunity that Israel is taking to try and claim more territory for itself. Certainly that DMZ behind me there has not had a permanent Israeli position in it in its entire history. It's been there since 1974. But what we've seen over the past 24 hours is tanks moving in, troops on the ground, and they are saying that they are under the instructions of the government to hold that territory until the situation in Syria becomes clearer.
Dasha, former president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, fleeing, the Kremlin confirming that he has been granted asylum by the Russian president, both Mr. al-Assad as well as his family. What more do we know at this point?
Yes, indeed. We have the confirmation from the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying on Monday that the Russian president himself has granted the asylum to Bashar al-Assad and his family. However, the Kremlin has refused to confirm the whereabouts of Bashar al-Assad, actually not saying whether he is in Moscow or somewhere else. However, we have heard previously the Russian media outlets, several of them citing an unnamed Kremlin official, a source, saying that Assad is actually already in Moscow, and some pictures have even circulated the social media showing him and his wife being in the Russian capital allegedly. We understand now that Moscow is actually intending to continue to have dialogue with the new Syrian authorities, and with regard to that, we understand Moscow has actually managed to preserve its diplomatic mission in Syria, which has, according to that same very Kremlin source, been taken under the security of the new military opposition in Syria. We also understand from the Kremlin that the future of Russia's naval base in Tartus, as well as the airfield in Hmeimim, is all going to be subject of the discussions that Russia will have with the new authorities. But what Moscow is now saying is that it is important to make sure that there there is the peaceful transition of power, Moscow is willing to cooperate with the new authorities. Again, we have seen the new flag of Syria being imposed on the Syrian embassy in Moscow, and the embassy says it is operating as normal. So indeed, we understand there are a lot of intricacies and very important moments for Moscow at this stage. But what also is important at this moment is that the security of those military facilities in Syria, according to Moscow, has been ensured, at least for the time being. We understand no threat is being imminent to those facilities. But also Moscow is sending a very strong message that should there be any sort of attack against those facilities, then Moscow will be responding harshly.
Well, thanks. Trent Murray and Dasha Chonyshova reporting live to us there.